The US and Canada, two massive neighbors, sharing the world's longest undefended border. But what if that border wasn't so permanent? What if certain American states, fed up with Washington's politics or drawn to Canada's stability, actually broke away? Sounds crazy, right? But here's the thing. Some states already have deep economic, cultural, and even political ties to Canada. Think about it. What if Vermont embraced its independent streak and left? What if Minnesota's northern charm felt more at home in Canada? And Alaska? It's already cut off from the rest of the U.S. Some of these might surprise you. Others? The signs are already there. Let's break it down. Number 10, Vermont. What if a U.S. state already felt more like Canada than America? Maple syrup, small towns, and crisp autumn air. Sounds like a postcard from Quebec, right? But it's also Vermont. And that's exactly why this state could be the first to say goodbye to America. Vermont has a long history of independence. In fact, it was once its own republic before joining the Union in 1791. Politically, it leans progressive, much like its northern neighbor. And here's where it gets interesting. A movement called the Second Vermont Republic has been pushing for secession for years, arguing the state would thrive on its own. Add to that strong trade ties with Quebec, a shared appreciation for social programs, and an economy built around industries that already align with Canada's. And suddenly, the idea of Vermont breaking away doesn't sound so far-fetched. Could it be America's first real secession in centuries? Number 9, Maine. One U.S. state already depends on Canada to survive, literally. Maine imports a huge portion of its electricity from Quebec, and over $3 billion in goods cross the border each year. But it's not just about power and trade. Culturally, Maine already feels more Canadian than American. Think rugged coastlines, tight-knit fishing towns, and a strong French-speaking population. It shares more with New Brunswick than, say, Texas. Politically, too, Maine often aligns more closely with Canada's policies than Washington's. And don't forget, Maine was once part of Massachusetts until it split off in 1820. If it could leave once, who's to say it couldn't do it again? Before we move on, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It helps us bring you more eye-opening content just like this. And trust me, what's coming next? You don't want to miss it. Number 8, New Hampshire. Live free or die isn't just a slogan, it's a way of life. New Hampshire is fiercely independent, with no income tax, no sales tax, and a strong libertarian streak. But what if that independence went even further? In 2022, lawmakers in the state actually proposed a constitutional amendment that would have put secession on the ballot. It didn't pass, but the fact it even reached the legislature? That's huge. New Hampshire has long resisted federal control, preferring personal freedom and local governance. In some ways, its decentralized mindset has more in common with Canada's provincial system than America's federal one. And economically, over $8 billion in trade flows between New Hampshire and Canada each year. Many of the state's businesses rely on Canadian partnerships to survive. Culturally, it's also a match. Rural towns, winter sports, a love for the outdoors. It shares more with Quebec and New Brunswick than with, say, California or Florida. And let's not forget the Free State Project, a movement encouraging libertarians to relocate to New Hampshire and push for minimal government. Could secession be their next big move? In a state where independence is everything, anything is possible. Number 7, Minnesota. You'd be shocked to know that one U.S. state is already so connected to Canada that leaving America might actually make sense. It has deep economic ties, a shared culture, and a population that, believe it or not, sometimes gets mistaken for being Canadian. That state? Minnesota. Let's break this down. Minnesota shares a nearly 550-mile border with Canada, and its largest trading partner is, yep, you guessed it, Canada. In 2023 alone, Minnesota exported over $7 billion worth of goods across the border, making Canada a lifeline for the state's economy. But it's not just about money. Minnesota and Canada share a similar lifestyle. The people are friendly, outdoorsy, and known for their thick accents and love of hockey. The weather? Brutally cold, just like Canada's. And the politics? Often more aligned with progressive Canadian policies than conservative American ones. And guess what? There's history here. Before Minnesota officially became a U.S. state in 1858, Parts of it were actually governed by the British, and its fur trade industry was heavily tied to Canada. Even today, many Minnesotans hold dual citizenship or have close family ties to Canadians just across the border. But here's where things get interesting. Some experts believe that if the U.S. ever faced political turmoil or economic collapse, Minnesota would be one of the first states to seriously consider alternative options. And with its deep connections to Canada, it wouldn't be surprising if some people started looking north instead of west. Before we move forward, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep bringing you content like this, packed with eye-opening facts and unexpected possibilities. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Number 6, North Dakota. What if a state realized it was more dependent on a foreign country than its own? Imagine being so economically tied to another nation that breaking away actually made sense. North Dakota isn't exactly that position. But is anyone paying attention? North Dakota might seem like a quiet, forgotten part of America. But guess what? Its economy is practically glued to Canada. Here's where things get wild. North Dakota exports more goods to Canada than any other country, a staggering $6 billion annually. And it's not just about trade. Energy, Canada supplies a huge portion of the state's power. Agriculture, North Dakota farmers depend on Canadian buyers to keep their businesses running. Even travel, a shocking number of residents routinely cross the border for healthcare, shopping, and work. In some towns, you're just as likely to see a Canadian license plate as an American one. But let's talk about politics. North Dakota's small government, pro-business mindset, and close trade ties actually align more with Canada's western provinces, especially Alberta, than Washington, D.C. And here's a crazy historical fact. At one point, there were serious discussions about North Dakota and Manitoba merging into a single economic zone. It didn't happen, but the idea hasn't completely disappeared. So what happens if the U.S. ever faces a political or economic crisis? North Dakota is already deeply dependent on Canada. So could it one day decide to make things official? It sounds shocking, but when a state's lifeline is a foreign country, the question becomes, why stay loyal to a system that barely notices you? Number 5, Montana. What if a state had more in common with Canada than the rest of the U.S.? What if its rugged independent spirit made it question whether staying in America was the right call? That's exactly the case for Montana. Here's the thing. Montana already operates like a Canadian province. It shares a 545-mile border with Alberta, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia. But here's the kicker. Those provinces aren't just neighbors, they're economic partners. In 2023, Montana exported over $700 million worth of goods to Canada, making it one of the state's biggest trade partners. And culturally, the people here live and breathe the outdoors just like their Canadian counterparts. Whether it's ranching, hunting, or surviving brutal winters, Montana and Canada are practically twins. But guess what? There's a historical precedent for Montana being more connected to Canada than the U.S. Back in the 1800s, before it officially became a state, much of Montana's fur trade was dominated by Canadian companies. Even today, many Minnesotans have dual citizenship or close family ties across the border. Some even joke that Alberta and Montana are basically the same place, except one has universal health care. And here's the part nobody talks about. Montana is home to a strong anti-federal government sentiment. Many Minnesotans believe Washington ignores them, and some would rather be part of a system that aligns with their values and economy. If things ever got bad enough, who's to say Montana wouldn't look north instead of east? Before we move forward, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep bringing you content packed with shocking facts and unexpected possibilities. And trust me, you won't believe what's next. What if a state felt more connected to its northern neighbor than its own country? What if its biggest city was already tied, financially, politically, and culturally to Canada? Washington might be known for its tech industry and coffee culture. But beneath the surface, there's something brewing, something that could change its future forever. Number 4, Washington. Why does this state feel more connected to its northern neighbor than the rest of the U.S.? Why are its biggest cities already financially, politically, and culturally intertwined with another nation? Washington isn't just close to Canada. It's deeply linked in ways that might make you wonder where its future truly lies. Could a shift be more likely than people think? The answer might surprise you. Let's talk numbers. Washington's #1 trading partner? Canada. In 2023 alone, over $20 billion in goods moved between the two. That's not just pocket change. That's a full-blown economic dependency. And it's not just trade. Washington relies on Canadian energy, with massive amounts of hydroelectric power flowing south from British Columbia. Even its biggest port, Seattle, is deeply linked to Canadian shipping routes, moving millions of dollars worth of goods between Asia and North America. But here's where it gets really crazy. Washington isn't just financially tied to Canada, it's politically aligned too. This is one of the most progressive states in the U.S., with policies on healthcare, environmental protection, and social services that often look more Canadian than American. Washington has also pushed for closer ties with British Columbia, including proposals for a high-speed rail that would connect Seattle and Vancouver in under 2 hours. Some politicians have even floated the idea of deeper economic integration. And guess what? The cultural overlap is impossible to ignore. From Vancouver to Seattle, people share the same outdoor lifestyle, tech-driven economy, and love for coffee. In fact, many British Columbians live and work in Washington while still calling Canada home. So if the U.S. ever faced a major political split, it wouldn't be surprising if Washington started looking north, not east. #3, Oregon. What if a state felt so disconnected from the rest of the country that it started considering alternatives? What if its people, culture, and economy aligned more with another nation? That's exactly what's happening in Oregon. And the shift is more serious than most people realize. First, let's talk money. Oregon's economy depends heavily on trade with Canada, moving over $4 billion in goods annually. But here's where it gets wild. Oregon has closer environmental and social policies to British Columbia than to its U.S. neighbors. The state's stance on healthcare, sustainability, and labor rights looks far more Canadian than it does American. And guess what? Some Oregonians already want out. You probably heard of the Greater Idaho movement, where rural counties want to leave Oregon and join Idaho. But here's the twist. Some residents argue that Western Oregon would be better off joining Canada. It sounds extreme, but when your state constantly clashes with the federal government, at what point do people start looking for a system that actually fits their values? And let's not forget the geography. Portland and Vancouver, Canada, not Washington, are practically twins. From outdoor lifestyles to progressive politics, the two cities feel more connected than Portland does to, say, Texas or Florida. So if a major crisis ever forced states to reconsider their allegiance, don't be shocked if Oregon started looking north instead of south. Before we move forward, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep bringing you content packed with shocking facts and unexpected possibilities. And trust me, you won't believe what's coming next. What if a U.S. state was so isolated, so deeply connected to another country, that it already operated like a separate nation? What if its strongest economic and military ties weren't with the U.S., but with someone else? Alaska might be known as America's last frontier, but what if it didn't stay American forever? #2, Alaska. How does a state feel American when it's physically cut off from the rest of the country? How does it stay connected when its economy, its defense systems, even its day-to-day life are more intertwined with another nation? Alaska may be a U.S. state on paper, but take a closer look, and you'll see just how tightly it's tied to Canada. Could it ever break away? The signs might surprise you. Let's start with geography. Alaska is much closer to Canada than to the rest of the continental U.S. In fact, the only way to drive from Alaska to the lower 48 is through Canadian territory. And it's not just about location. Alaska's economy is deeply linked to Canada's. Billions of dollars move between the two each year, especially in oil, seafood, and raw materials. Some of the state's biggest fishing operations even rely on Canadian waters. And Canadian companies? They own massive stakes in Alaska's resource industries. But here's where it gets really interesting. Alaska used to be Russian territory. That might sound unrelated, but it proves one important point. Alaska hasn't always been American. So if the U.S. ever faced political upheaval or economic collapse, would Alaska chart its own course? Or would it look north, where its economic roots already run deep? And then there's the military factor. Alaska hosts some of the most strategically critical U.S. military bases. But Canada already plays a key role in the region's defense. Through NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, Canadian and American forces work side by side, including in Alaska. So if a major geopolitical shift ever happens, Alaska and Canada, they're likely to collaborate first before anyone else. And if you're already living like an independent nation, making it official isn't such a wild idea. Number 1, Michigan. You might be shocked to learn just how connected this state is to Canada, so much so that it almost feels like part of it already. Michigan relies on Canada more than any other U.S. state, with a staggering $80 billion in trade crossing the border every year. Detroit and Windsor, they function like one giant industrial zone, with thousands of trucks crossing the border daily. Let's break that down. Michigan trades more with Canada than any other state. The Detroit-Windsor corridor is one of the busiest trade routes in all of North America. If that link were ever severed, Michigan's economy could collapse overnight. And the auto industry, Michigan's crown jewel, is deeply dependent on Canada. Factories in Detroit and Windsor are so intertwined. Many cars are built using parts from both sides of the border. If you've driven a Ford, Chevy, or Chrysler, there's a good chance Canadian labor helped build it. But the connection goes even deeper. Michigan and Canada share bridges, tunnels, even power. The state relies on Canadian electricity. And the Ambassador Bridge, the busiest U.S.-Canada crossing, it's owned by a Canadian billionaire. And here's a historical twist. After the Toledo War in the 1800s, some Michiganders actually wanted to join Canada instead of staying with the U.S. That never happened. But the sentiment, it never completely disappeared. With its economy, energy, and even parts of its identity tied to Canada, could Michigan one day rethink its place in the Union? It sounds wild, until you realize it's already living like a Canadian province. So, could any of these states really break away and join Canada? At first, it sounds like pure speculation, but the facts don't lie. From tightly linked economies to joint military operations and shared infrastructure, some U.S. states are already closer to their northern neighbor than most people realize. And if America ever faces a major political or economic crisis, who's to say those ties wouldn't pull stronger than loyalty to the U.S.? History has shown us borders change, nations evolve, and sometimes what seems impossible today becomes tomorrow's reality. So what do you think? Could any of these states actually leave the U.S. and join Canada? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video for more mind-blowing stories just like this. Until next time.